Hey everyone, I'm Alex, and today on Big Al Books, I'm going to be wrapping up all the books I read this October. So I got through 10 books, a few of them were rereads, a few of them were creepy books for Halloween, and 2 of them were classics for Victober. So starting off with the rereads, I finally got around to revisiting the His Dark Materials trilogy by Philip Pullman. I really loved these books as a younger reader, and I've been worried to revisit it as an older person, thinking that, it might not be the same going back to this world, but I'm so happy that I did revisit these because it was just a lot of fun, and I knew, from chapter 1, that was I am so happy to be back in this world. Book 1 in this series is just a straight up fun fantasy adventure novel. It's more plot based, but you have a great time following around the main character, Lyra. She is this tough little girl, just lies to everyone, gets herself into all of these situations. So book 1 is pretty great, but then the scale just shifts when you get to books 2 and 3. Philip Pullman just knows how to crank it up in intensity. So in book 2, we're introduced to characters who live in other worlds. So Philip Pullman writes about this universe where worlds live alongside each other, just in different dimensions. So that's a really crazy concept, and you play around with that a lot in the second book. And then in the third book, you basically have a war against God. So this is some very serious philosophical stuff that Philip Pullman is dealing with. So don't think that these are just your everyday children's books. There is so much going on, especially if you have read John Milton's Paradise Lost or some poetry by William Blake. There's so many literary references going on here. We've got philosophy and theology. There's a lot happening here. I think it's truly magical what Philip Pullman has achieved in these books because they are so fast-paced and the plot is so engaging that you just keep racing through the pages, and yet he's still able to address these really heavy philosophical questions. This book essentially addresses what is the meaning of life. We have some characters that descend into the underworld to free the souls of the dead, and they have to account for what they've done on their time on Earth and what makes up a life that's been worth living. So this is some really heavy things happening here, and yet it's so fun and you don't even realize it almost, and the characters are just so vivid. So it's an amazing thing when he just gives you all this substance, but yet it's still such an engaging read. And the emotional content in these books is also off the charts. I thought because I was rereading it as a grown-up that I wasn't gonna get as emotionally engaged reading this story. I knew what was going to happen. I thought it's not going to get me this time. But then midway through the second book, it was starting to dawn on me that yes, I'm going to start feeling stuff again. This is going to be hard. And yeah, these books did emotionally destroy me once again. Amber Spyglass made me cry in a few places. So that's amazing that these books can still touch the heart of this withered old crone. So I really do highly recommend them. I'm sure nostalgia's a factor in making these books so great for me, but still really loved them. The reason that I reread them was to get around to The Book of Dust, but I didn't do that. But I'm hoping that my library is actually going to finally get a physical copy of that sometime soon because I'm really ready to dive back into this world again. The only nonfiction book that I read this month was called Revolutions, Essays on Contemporary Canadian Fiction by Alex Good. And I am down for anything that is criticizing the conventions of CanLit, and this book did not let me down on that front. So Alex Good is very critical of what he calls the establishment. So he thinks that the Canadian literary scene is run by certain prestigious authors and publishing figures, and that these people are controlling what we read, what wins Giller Prizes, what represents Canada as far as literature goes, and he thinks that this is kind of not necessarily the innovative or exciting fiction, rather it's kind of the stale fiction that's looking back towards the past. So a lot of people aren't necessarily engaged in Canadian literature as they should be. This collection starts off really strong and had me laughing quite a few times, which is pretty rare for literary criticism, but Alex Good is a pretty fierce critic and he tears apart a lot of passages by famous writers, which is a lot of fun on this sentence by sentence level, so it does get you thinking about what is good writing. And it kind of lost steam as it went along. There are these two really long pieces on the Giller Prizes from years past, and he goes into great detail about the books on the short lists and the long lists, and I just wasn't familiar with a lot of those books, so it kind of grew tiring of him talking about all these books that I haven't read and have no interest in reading. And also at the end, he lost me a little bit because he is really against judging authors by identity politics. So he's saying like he doesn't really care about your race or gender or anything like that, and that's what's ruining literature in universities because professors are choosing to teach more diverse authors, which I don't really agree with him as that being a big problem as he makes it out to be. So this book started out strong, kind of lost its way, but it was still pretty fun for the most part if you are nerdy and want to read about Camlet. I ended up reading one new release this month, and that was Singh Unburied Sing by Jesmyn Ward. This is a fairly hyped new release, and I was so excited to read this book. I thought it was going to be this Southern Gothic odyssey of a novel, and unfortunately this book did not live up to my expectations at all. I really didn't enjoy reading this book. I made a review video talking about these feelings in greater detail, so I'll link that down below if you want to learn more about what this book is about, some of the things that it does well, and some of the reasons why I didn't end up connecting with this story. This is a book that a lot of people seem to be loving, and it's been nominated for the National Book Awards, so most of the conversation around this book is really glowing praise, but I don't know, it just didn't happen for me. So unfortunately, that was a miss for me and Jesmyn Ward, but I will still continue to try out more of her stuff in the future. Moving along to Victober, I managed to read 2 Victorian novels this month. I was hoping to read more, but the ones I ended up picking were very long, so it is what it is. And the first one I read was The Tenant of Wildfell Hall by Bronte, and I'm so happy to have finally made the acquaintance of Anne because, you know, I'd been neglecting this third Bronte sister, and she is really doing her own thing. You know, I went into this expecting some more of the classic Bronte storminess, and Anne's really got her own vibe. This novel isn't very spooky or gothic, nor are the emotions as passionate as some other Bronte novels can be, but it's still an important story. I mean, it's about a woman who is leaving behind her dirtbag husband at a time when women weren't really doing this kind of thing, so that's pretty exciting. I heard that this novel was attacked when it came out for its realistic portrayals of drunkenness, which is a topic that most Victorian novels shied away from at the time, but Anne Bronte is not afraid to just go for it and show the damaging effects that alcohol had on a lot of families at the time. The best part of this book is for sure the big chunk in the middle that's made up of Helen's diary entries from the time that she was in this hellish marriage, but unfortunately this book is framed by a section at the beginning and the end where it's narrated by this guy who kind of is interested with Helen, and it's all about the like small town dynamics and everyone being a huge gossip, and this guy is also a bit of a creep and a mama's boy, and he did not make for an excellent narrator. So this book loses a lot of points for making us spend so much time in the company of this annoying man. And I thought the ending was also very weak. And there was a lot of material that could have been trimmed down. I don't think we would have missed out on cutting out some of these scenes. But still, this was enjoyable for the most part. I did like reading it, and I'm glad I finally got around to it, even if it wasn't a perfect novel. Another Victorian classic that I'm so glad I finally read this month was Vanity Fair by William Makepeace Thackeray. This is a beast of a novel, but it went by pretty quickly. It was a lot of fun. It follows a few characters who are trying to find their place in society, and there's a lot of rising and falling, all these ups and downs. No one's position is secure. I was surprised at how modern this book felt at times. There are almost these postmodern moments where Thackeray breaks the fourth wall all, and he acknowledges that he's the writer and has access to the thoughts of his characters, or he reminds us that he's in control of the puppet show, and this whole book is structured like a performance. So it's not a realistic novel in that sense, where we're always aware that these people are not only actors in their day-to-day lives, but they're also puppets controlled by Thackeray. And the content of this book is also very modern. The elements of society that he is criticizing in this book are still very relevant. Vanity Fair is still in full swing, where people are idolizing status and money and power and living lifestyles that they can't afford and doing terrible things just to gain position. So it's still such a relevant book. It will have you recognizing our society today. I also enjoyed that even though this book is a satire and he is ripping some of these characters to shreds, that they are still very fully rounded characters, and that you also feel things for them. So they're not just these like types that are representing certain ideas, but they are fully fleshed out people, and they're complex people. No one's just good or bad in this novel. There's a lot of things going on, so that made these characters really compelling to read about, especially Becky Sharp. She is one of my new favorite characters. I thought she was so fascinating in the way that she is just doing what it takes to climb society and looking out for herself. This is one of those long books that's totally worth the commitment, and I am glad that I finally got to read this book because I had so much fun. For the last part of this video, I'm going to talk about 3 creepy books that I read to get in the Halloween spirit. The first one was Teatro Grotesque by Thomas Ligotti, and really just looking at that cover, that will tell you everything that you need to know about this book. It is so dark and disturbing, just weird, and such an unsettling reading experience. It's not the kind of book where something scary or like thrilling happens. It's more just the atmosphere of dread and unease that Ligotti can conjure up. His narrators are all the same type of guy. They are these like chronically ill, insomniac writers that have this pessimistic view of life. They are entangled in all these strange things. They have weird memories from their childhoods that are haunting them, these abandoned carnivals, or these small, strange towns, abandoned factories, creepy puppets. Like, this book has so many weird things going on. It was quite the experience. I did like it for the most part, but I found it kind of got tiring when you kept reading about the same kind of narrator. There's not a wide range going on here, but Thomas Ligotti is very good at what he does, and these stories were super weird. Another short story collection that I read was The Collector of Hearts, New Tales of the Grotesque by Joyce Carol Oates. I really disliked these stories. I thought this was a super weak collection of short stories, especially coming off of the creepiness from Teatro Grotesco. This is kind of trying to do the same thing, where again it's trying just to build the spooky ambiance and the energy, where it's not, again, lots of scary things that are actually happening, but it's more the mood or the weird, creepy moments of everyday life. But Joyce Carol Oates just was not successful in any of these stories, and just the writing, I was just really shocked. Like, it was not good. Like, here are a few of the opening sentences for some of these stories. In a long ago time when I didn't know, yes, I was happy. I was myself and I was happy. How strangeness enters our lives. How swift and how irrevocable. This is the way it was, or will be. This is the way it was, or will be. That's right, she used the same opening sentence twice. I really did not enjoy those vague introductions to her stories, so I found it hard to get invested or to take her seriously as a storyteller. There were a few stories in here that had decent premises, but it was really tiresome to get through this short story collection, and you know it's not good when it took me like a week to finish the last 10 pages because I just never wanted to pick this book up. So this was a big miss for me, which is such a shame because I was really excited to try out Joyce Carol Oates, and it did not go well, so hopefully she does a lot better with her novels or we are not going to be friends. The last spooky book I read was a reread for me, and that was We Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson. I read this book, I feel like in one sitting a few years ago in October, and it was so pleasant, and I've just been really looking forward to revisiting it, and I'm so glad that I did. I read most of this book on Halloween itself, which was a great way to spend the day. This is just such a strange little book. It's charming and bizarre at the same time. I love how this book seems so simple on the surface, and then you keep thinking about it, and it slowly reveals that this is actually a pretty complex situation that's going on. So you think that you have these two poor sisters whose family died in this tragic incident, and they live in this small town full of these like evil, ignorant villagers that just can't leave them alone and keep interfering with their life. The two sisters seem like victims at the start of the story, but of course the situation is more complicated and messed up than it initially appears. Mary Cat is a fabulously unreliable narrator, but I just really enjoy her voice and her personality. She practices this strange form of magic that's kind of like OCD. She's so fiercely protective of her sister and their life together. This reads like some sort of demented fairy tale, and it's such a special book. It really takes you into this world, and there's nothing else that I've read that's like anything like this. So it was so much fun to revisit, and I'm sure it's a book I'll be returning back to again and again. Those are the books that I read this October. Kind of an inconsistent reading month for me. I found that I was either loving stuff or hating it with very little in between. So that is how it went for me this month. Let me know how your reading month went, if you read anything good for Victober or anything scary for Halloween. I always love hearing some recommendations. So thank you for watching, and I hope you have a great reading month in November.